The Kalashnikov rifle is one of the most popular weapons, which even people who are far from the military subjects know about. It seems that this rifle has been studied up and down, and literally everything is known about it. But there's one thing about the Kalashnikov rifle that almost no one knows about. Why do AK magazines have that strange orange color? Not many weapon experts know about it, but today we will finally answer the question of why the Soviets chose this particular color. What other colors could they have chosen? And what if I told you that the AK magazines were actually yellow, and it wasn't until a long time later that they accidentally became orange? So the Kalashnikov rifle was adapted in June 1949, and 10 years later its upgraded version, the AKM rifle, appeared in 1959. At first it had simple wooden parts and black steel magazines. However, the Russians almost immediately set out to create an improved version of the AK rifle. A goal was set, consisting of the three main points. The first was to reduce the cost of the rifle, the second was to simplify its production, the third was to reduce the weight of the rifle, but without losing its durability. To do this, the Russians began to experiment with plastic and use it as material for different AK parts. After several long tests, they realized that the type of plastic that is most fit for the task is the material called AG4. It was that beloved orange bakelite. Many people think that bakelite first appeared only on the AK-74 rifle. In fact, the first bakelite parts on the AK appeared as early as 1959 on the modernized Kalashnikov rifle. The Russians tried making the magazine, stock, grip, handguard, gas tube cover, and even the dust cover out of bakelite. Things didn't go really smoothly with the plastic, however. Their soldiers were testing the AK in Central Asia, which was part of the Soviet Union with quite a hot climate. There they learned that the bakelite parts on the AK rifle tended to overheat, making it impossible to hold the gun properly. They did the same in cold Siberia, and the result was just as depressing. Plastic parts freeze too much and cause discomfort to the shooter, unlike wooden parts. The plastic parts simply could not withstand the stresses the Russians expected the Kalashnikov rifle to endure. It had a low durability and would crack on impact. As a result, they were able to make sufficiently durable bakelite parts only in 1967. But right then the Soviets started the Lегкость project, lightness project, and began working on the new A3 rifle, the future AK-74. Despite experiments with plastic parts were not abandoned, the Russians managed to design only bakelite magazines and grips for the old AKM rifle and the RPK machine gun. Of course, there's no problem with putting a plastic stock, grip, handguard or gas tube cover from the AK-74 on the old AKM, because their parts are interchangeable, just like on the Kalashnikov machine guns. But why did the Russians choose the orange color? There are three persistent myths. The first myth is that the orange magazine is better visible on the ground, on green grass or on white snow in winter. That way a Soviet soldier can do a quick reload and simply drop an empty magazine on the ground. The orange color would make all the dropped magazines easy to find after combat. That's not true. Anyone who has served in the Soviet or Russian army knows that for such a cool quick reload, a punishment from a sergeant is inevitable. It will reach you even before the dropped magazine has time to reach the ground. The second myth also has to do with reloading. They say that the Soviet engineers chose this particular color so that the soldiers could reload their AKs faster, looking at the magazine with peripheral vision only during reloading, thus not being distracted from the battlefield. This also has nothing to do with reality. Even modern armies are not that scrupulous about having their soldiers reload their weapons quickly. And the third myth, it concerns the fact that the magazines were designed in orange color so that they would resemble the wooden AK parts, the handguard, the gas tube cover and the stock. After all, as you know, the old and traditional principle of uniformity in all things is of great significance in the Soviet and Russian army. That's not true either. People who talk about this don't even roughly understand how much effort and money the Russians spent on creating a plastic magazine. To do such a thing just for the sake of appearance is silly, and it certainly isn't something that would have been done in the Soviet army. Now, what is the actual reason? Why is the AK magazine orange? The reason is that in the 60s the Soviet Union experimented a lot of different colors and different kinds of plastic. And it was only from bakelite that they managed to make durable, lightweight and temperature-resistant parts. And the original color of bakelite was something between brown and orange. Then they tried to add a dye to the bakelite during production to change the color of the parts to black or something else that was darker. It's simple, just add the color you like best, right? Wrong in fact. It turns out that when you add dye, bakelite loses its properties. They added black and green to it and even produced a few dozen experimental magazines. but they all turned out to be less durable than Bakelite hardware without dye added. But did you know that the orange AK magazines were originally yellow and only became orange after a while? Here's how it was. After they were released from the factory, the magazines were sent to Soviet warehouses. At that point they were of a rich yellow color. Then, about a year later, they would start to change their color from yellow to light orange and then to dark orange, closer to brown. This is why all Bakelite magazines differ in their coloring. It is worth mentioning that the Russians made a huge number of things out of Bakelite. Ammunition boxes, pistol grips, bayonet knife sheaths for rifles, and even cases for radios. What's more, they had a real crazy scientist who literally made all his rifles out of Bakelite. That's Herman Korobov, and I'm kidding, of course, he wasn't crazy. On the contrary, he made a lot of great rifles. You have to understand that orange Bakelite magazines were actually not what the Russians wanted. Their goal was to create sturdy plastic parts in black. However, any materials with black dyes turned out to be very fragile. It wasn't until the end of the 1980s that the Russians were able to make black plastic parts that were sturdy enough. This was achieved by switching from Bakelite AG4 to polyamide PA6. In addition, Bakelite had a number of disadvantages. Mikhail Kalashnikov himself spoke about them. The material AG4 Bakelite is very harmful in production, produces a large amount of toxic substances during processing, and is extremely labor-intensive when making products from it. Therefore, the Russians switched to PA6 polyamide, and it was used to make black handguards, stocks, magazines and grips for the AK-74 rifle and RPK-74 machine gun, and then for the new AK-74M rifle and the 100th Kalashnikov series. Thank you all for watching, my name is Casper and I'll see you guys real soon.